Hello, I'm Maria Hall Brown, and this is LA Currents. Activist, urban planner, and 2.5 years ago, she took her seat as a council member for the 4th District of Los Angeles. I'm delighted to be joined today by Nithya Raman. So nice to have you back.
Thank you for having me. Very excited.
You know, you mentioned the fact that it's been 2.5 years, and we spoke when you had just taken the office.
Right.
Does it feel like it's been 2.5 years or 200 years?
It's certainly been a very tumultuous time in City Council. I don't know if I can't remember exactly when we spoke last time, but when I started, we were in the middle of pre-vaccine COVID. So I didn't even get a chance to meet with constituents face to face until months after I had already been in the seat. And so for me, today's world in LA feels completely different from the one that I started in.
Well, and you've taken a real leadership position in a lot of ways. You've really jumped in, in a very, thorough and dedicated way. And as part of that, I mean, one of the most important things that you were dealing with is you were chair of the City Council Housing and Homelessness Committee. I mean, that is a huge, huge, huge position to be in. But what does that mean, and where are we in that whole situation?
So I became the chair at the beginning of this year, really. I asked for the two committees. They used to be separate. The Housing Committee and the Homelessness and Poverty Committee used to be separate. But to me, housing and homelessness are two sides of the same coin, and we have to be able to consider them together. So I asked the council president to combine them and to put me at the leadership of that committee. And he did, and I'm really, really excited. And over this past year, what we've really done is to try and create what I think is the most essential thing for us to be able to move out of this moment of crisis, which is a citywide and holistic response to our crisis. And that means really taking a step back to assess where we are and to make sure that we have a plan in place for moving to our next step.
So exactly how long has the committee been meeting, and where are you and what are you focused on in committee?
So we've been meeting as a combined housing and homelessness committee since the beginning of this year.
Okay.
And one of the big things that we've been talking about in the committee is how to move from a district by district approach to homelessness to a citywide approach to homelessness. Right now in the city, a lot of the actions that we need to take in order to address our homelessness crisis, like finding shelter beds for people who are experiencing homelessness. And here in Los Angeles, that's an urgent task because we have less than 1/3 of the shelter beds that we need for our total unhoused population, which means close to 30,000 people are living on LA's city streets, which is absolutely our humanitarian crisis and a crisis of many, 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 many shapes. And so for us, we have to find a citywide approach to finding shelter. Right now, what happens is that every council district looks for shelter options on its own. We're not really staffed to do that. We're not equipped to do that in many ways. I've hired a consultant in our office who knows the real estate market so that we can look for options. But that really shouldn't be how we maximize the number of beds that we have in the city and create the greatest efficiencies. It may be that beds are far cheaper in one location than another. It may be that the need is far more in one location rather than another. And we really need to be thinking about this citywide. And so that, along with a number of other issues in how we address homelessness, is what we're considering through the committee and how to make a citywide process in doing that. One thing I'm very excited about is that we've put forward from our office a pathway to thinking about actually creating an RFP process for interim housing that sets out exactly what the city needs, that sets out where the beds need to be, in what broad regions, and really allows for the private market to offer up options rather than us having to go out and secure options and making deals one by one. And I think that kind of approach, which is the kind of thing that the City of New York already does, could be a transformative approach to the way that we actually site shelters.
How is that being received? Because as you were speaking, and I'm thinking about, the geographical range of Los Angeles as a city and the diversity as a city and the different constituencies that everybody represents. How is that being received, and how is it going to be put into place in a very practical way? Just even thinking about transportation from one place to another, or thinking about communication from one district to another, or thinking about, you know, fiscal resources from one district to another. Is everybody speaking the same, you know, thoughts?
I think when you're talking about centralizing something like the response to homelessness, that does mean that you're taking power away from individual council districts and from individual council members. And so there's always pushback around that. We as council members, we're held responsible for so many of the outcomes, even when they're largely out of our hands. But on this issue in particular, homelessness has been really, individual council members have really been held responsible for homelessness in a way that many other issues, I think, really aren't. And so for us, we have to push back against, I think, that resistance to losing a little bit of that power. We really have to think about what is the way in which we can think about finding resources across the entire city and in ways that ensure that the resources are where they're most needed. We have a lot of people who are experiencing homelessness in particular parts of the city. We need more resources there. In places like the Valley where homelessness exists, but it's spread out over a larger region, we may need to have regional sites along with transportation options. That kind of planning, if it's split between multiple districts, simply doesn't happen. We have to have a citywide approach and a regional approach to this issue. But it's been tough. It's definitely tough. It is pushing back against the way that things have always been done. It's pushing back against individual council member approval and power. It is also, I think, you know, it's an approach to homelessness that I think makes a lot of people nervous, because historically, the systems that we have traditionally dealt with to respond to homelessness, like the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, have not done and performed in the way that council members want them to. And so we have to create a system that really delivers on outcomes in order for council members to trust that they can cede a little bit of power and still see results in their own neighborhoods, that they're able to see people get into housing, that they're able to see encampments resolved and people moved indoors effectively and safely for an entire neighborhood. That kind of results-oriented action, currently, the system is not delivering on that. And so we have to do two things at the same time. We have to centralize, but also make more effective how the system operates.
I would imagine there needs to be a great deal of research involved, because in order to be able to make any of these decisions, in order to be able to, you know, utilize the services that are there appropriately and available, you need to know what's there. So has there been a big, huge research push to find out the nonprofits that are doing what work, the city-run organizations that are doing what work, just so you have a picture of every opportunity that's available to you before you start making decisions about which ones to utilize?
Yes, so I think those two questions are really being explored in parallel with one another, because the way in which the city works, making change in, say, how we issue a request for proposals for interim shelter, or how we allocate budgetary resources for something like that, that process can take so long and can take so many years to go from idea to execution that you can't wait till all the research is done before you kickstart the process of changing how that process actually functions. And so really what we're doing is both of those things in parallel. There's another issue which we've been looking at within the committee, which is homelessness prevention. Right now, we have a situation here in the city of Los Angeles where we're housing a lot of people off the streets every single day. And yet, our homelessness crisis appears to be growing from our most recent homeless count. In our district, we've made real progress, but across the city, you know, we're seeing numbers grow, we're seeing encampments grow. People can see that change. And that is because so many more people are losing their homes and falling into homelessness than the number that we're able to house on any given day. And so homelessness prevention really becomes central to our work. We have to do prevention in order for us to be successful at addressing homelessness overall. But homelessness prevention at the city is housed in multiple departments. There's tenant protection work that sits at the housing department. There is poverty alleviation work that sits at CIFD, the Community Investment in Families Department. There is work that's being done in partnership with the county through various programs. So there's all of these different programs that are in place, and now there's also a new mayor who's also doing work on homelessness prevention. Are all of these programs talking to each other? How are they coordinating to make sure that efforts are not duplicative? How are we making sure that we're evaluating those programs to really demonstrate that homelessness prevention is working in the city of Los Angeles? All of that is work that the committee is undertaking right now. So we just looked at every single one of these entities. Each of them reported to the committee on what they're doing and how they're doing it. And now we have behind the scenes a convening of those departments regularly to ensure that we're making progress on answering exactly those questions.
It's been a tough battle, and at times it feels as if progress is being made, and other times it feels like, as you mentioned, the count goes up or we're seeing more visible signs. Are you feeling optimistic at all? Is any progress being made, or do you think we have to hit a certain critical mass before something is legitimately shifted so that everyone feels as if we're making the right choices?
So I think for us in our council district, we are seeing progress because I know where some of my encampments were when I got elected or when those areas were moved into my district during redistricting. I know the efforts that my staff has made to connect individuals in those encampments with beds, and now we can see that those encampments are no longer there, not because we pushed people into another neighborhood, but because we actually housed people, right? So I can look around my district, and because I know it, and I know where people used to once live on our district streets, I can see and feel that progress. And yet I know that there is real challenges across the entire city. So at this time, I would say that I feel both challenged and hopeful. Mm-hmm. The system is so big, the system is so complex that making change sometimes can feel overwhelming and almost impossible. And yet, we have a new mayor who has come in with a real sense of urgency around addressing homelessness and a real kind of mandate from the people. It was really what no matter who won that mayoral race, they would have come in with a mandate on homelessness. And so she is an incredible partner. She's reached out to the county in ways that the two entities haven't worked together before, and now there's real communication happening there. And at the council, we have, a whole number of new council members, as well as a renewed sense of urgency and action around this issue. I felt like I was very alone in my first couple of years in focusing on this, and now I don't feel alone at all. It feels like the thing that the city is focused on in a way that hasn't been the case before, and I'm really excited about that. Does that mean that homelessness is going to be resolved overnight? Absolutely not. But are we making real progress? Are we making institutional improvements? Are we making change? I say yes, and hopefully all of us will be able to see and feel those results.
I'm sure a lot of people feel exactly the same way you do about hopefully we'll be able to see those results, because that is a topic that cannot seem to be avoided in any situation. Absolutely. When you're speaking with anyone who works with the city. In regards to actual homeowners that are in your district, there's also an issue that you have been addressing recently in terms of short-term rentals and where they are appropriate and are a benefit to a homeowner in order for income opportunities, and then when they are just a huge problem to everyone. So where is that situation within your district? Because there's been a lot of conversation.
Yeah, Council District 4 has a lot of short-term rentals, whether it's apartments in Hollywood where people are renting out bedrooms for visiting tourists, or homes in the hills which are being rented out and being sometimes used as party houses. Short-term rentals pose a challenge for the city in terms of their very existence. They are a resource for people who are coming in and staying here, but they can be real challenges for the neighborhoods around them. They can be nuisances, they can be instances where crime happens or homicides happen. They can also take affordable housing off the market. particularly when short-term rentals are being rented out illegally. The city has a short-term rental ordinance that it adopted in 2018. What we've found, both anecdotally and in the experience of many of our constituents and through data, is that that ordinance is simply not being enforced in the way that it should be. And so I have really made this a priority in my work. We put forward a motion co-signed by a number of other council members who also have the same challenge in their own districts, and we're finally starting to see the outcomes of that legislative work now. We have a report that came back from the Department of City Planning that told us the facts that really reflected our anecdotal experiences. It can take 2 to 3 years for a single illegal short-term rental to be cited by the city. 2 to 3 years. That is not, to me, an efficient or an effective enforcement mechanism for LA. Other things that report found were that departments simply weren't talking to each other effectively. There has to be multi-departmental conversations in order for us to be actually able to address issues that are coming up at short-term rentals, and those conversations were very, very tough to actually make happen. And so the report is really going to help us figure out how can we fix this problem of enforcement? How can we resource the departments effectively? And how do we make sure that those processes are happening where they're talking to each other quickly so it isn't taking 2 to 3 years? The other piece is that residents, when they were seeing problems in their own neighborhoods, were writing to the Department of City Planning and asking, does my neighbor have a valid short-term rental license? Is he supposed to be renting his home out or renting his room out? Because I see different people going in and out all the time. The Department of City Planning used to take weeks to respond to those kinds of inquiries. Finally, thanks to our work, we have a publicly available short-term rental database where you can put in an address, you can see whether it has a valid license, and you can see whether there have been complaints at that address. And so residents are far more empowered to be able to address issues in their neighborhood if they're seeing it, thanks to the work of council and thanks to the work of the department, but we have a long way to go to actually be able to solve this problem.
How difficult is it to get a short-term rental license? Because especially in a location such as Los Angeles and some of the iconic areas that are in District 4, that's a draw for tourists. Mm-hmm. It, as I earlier mentioned, an income source for people because, it's obviously valuable, and it's a nice opportunity and asset for those that are traveling that are maybe going with a large group, and 6 hotel rooms versus a nice 3-bedroom house is
right.
Substantively more affordable and more appealing. And then in particular, when you think about all the events that are going to be taking place in Los Angeles in the next few years that are going to draw an array of people from around the world. How do you feel about short-term rentals at large, and how hard is it to get a short-term rental license?
So I think getting a license, if you follow the process and if you follow the law, is a fairly straightforward affair. You have to show proof of residence in that unit. You have to make sure that you're not renting it out over a particular set of days every year. You have to, I think, make sure you're paying a certain set of fees that the Department of City Planning is asking you. And City Planning is able to review those licenses and get back to residents fairly effectively when they're applying for them. About short-term rentals overall, I guess I would say that in 2018 when the ordinance was written, that conversation about how should we accommodate mm-hmm. short-term rentals in the city, that's a conversation that the city had then. What I'm afraid of now is that the rules and the guidelines that they came up with, here's how we want to see short-term rentals actually exist in our city. We want to make sure they don't cut into our RSO or naturally occurring affordable housing. We want to make sure that people aren't renting their house out for so many days that they're actually converting long-term rentals into short-term rentals.
Right.
The rules were designed to achieve certain kinds of outcomes. And yet what we're seeing now is that those rules aren't being followed.
Got it.
Right? And so I think the question before us now is not how do we want short-term rentals in this city to operate, because that's already set out in the ordinance. My goal is to say, we have a set of rules and norms that we agreed on. Let's enforce it.
Got it.
Let's make sure it's actually happening. And If that really doesn't work, then let's go back to the drawing board to think about whether we should have short-term rentals at all. But, I think the city can do better.
Well, speaking of going back to the drawing board, and I mean literally drawing, redistricting.
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, that's been an enormous conversation. And there has been, as you mentioned, since you took the council member position, there's been a lot of tumultuous change within the council at large, and now there's a bigger conversation about expanding the council and redistricting. Where is that right now?
So I underwent redistricting in my first year, and my district was radically changed. I lost about 40% of my old district, and I have new neighborhoods, not so new anymore. I've already been representing them for almost 2 years, and they're wonderful neighborhoods that we've had an opportunity to really get to know by serving them, and it's been great. But the way that process played out was, how do I put this? I think it felt to a lot of observers and participants, including myself, that redistricting was done to benefit individual council members and their power, as opposed to benefiting the people of Los Angeles and how they're represented. So after that redistricting process happened, I put forward a motion along with Council Member Krikorian asking for the city to implement independent redistricting. This is what's done at the state level. This is what's done across many jurisdictions across America. It's the best practice for redistricting. And after a long time, when it didn't move forward in council, after the tapes came out, those scandalous, racist tapes, finally, that motion is being heard through a newly formed ad hoc committee on governance reform, which I think the tapes really necessitated. In fact, I asked for that committee to be created. And now I sit as the vice chair, the council president is the chair. And I think it's an exciting forum to talk about how the city of Los Angeles can improve some of these big processes to make sure that the city is truly working for its people as opposed to for the benefit of itself or for its own elected representatives. Independent redistricting is one of the things that we're considering, but the other thing that's also on the table is decreasing the size of council districts. Right now, individual council districts are 250 to 260,000 people large. These are the largest districts of any major city in America, much larger than New York or Chicago or Boston. And I think it's time to think about whether smaller districts might serve constituents better. And the city is now really figuring out whether we can accommodate that, how would it change decision making, and how would it actually improve constituent services. Because if you cut the size of council district, but you also cut the size of council staff, are you going to get better service as a constituent? I'm not sure.
Well, that's an interesting question, because you're talking about cooperative efforts for, the major crises in the city, such as homelessness. And so you're already talking about trying to have all the districts work together. And then, in fact, if there are more districts and more personalities and more individuals, is it going to work? They seem to be in conflict with each other.
I think that's a really good question. I think you can't have this conversation about council size without also a broader conversation about how we make decisions here in the city of Los Angeles. Look, having a lot of people talk about things and come to consensus is not impossible. There's cities across America that have large numbers of council members and that do legislative work effectively and that are able to make decisions and move things forward. But LA is unique because each individual council member has more power than in many other cities. We have a weak mayor, strong council system. So in that system, if you then increase the number of people who have decision-making power, are you going to make it impossible to govern? I think you have to do two things at once. You have to think about decreasing the size of the districts, but also think about how you can take some of the decision-making power that currently sits with council members and either make it a council-wide decision or make it a mayoral decision, particularly around questions of land use and land use reform. And I think those two decisions or discussions need to happen simultaneously in order for us to get to true governance reform here in LA.
Do we need to streamline communication at large? Does there need to be some sort of technological advancement on all district platforms in order for you all to be able to communicate more clearly and succinctly versus sitting in a council meeting?
I think that there needs to be definitely thought given to how the council does its work and how it communicates that work out to the public. I'll just give you a small example. When I first started in city council, second largest city in America, I wasn't really given the kind of briefing or guidance that I received when I started as a board member at the Air Quality Management District, to which I was appointed a year after I got into this role. I had staff time given to me. I was given significant administrative guidance when I started in my role as a board member at AQMD. That is, I think, the kind of structure and support that we can put together for a council in order for it to be more effective that we currently lack. And I think it will take time and a real discussion on how the council needs to be operating as a body as opposed to each member operating alone and for themselves. That's a conversation that I think we still haven't started having yet. We're still, we have a council president who's now been here since January as well. And he's brought a new culture of mutual respect to the body, which is really exciting. There's vibrant discussions where people have real disagreements about how policy should be made, but ultimately we come to a decision and we move on. And that's been really exciting to see because it wasn't always the case in my time on the council.
Well, I was going to say, if you don't know how it works, how are you going to make it work?
Exactly, exactly right. But I think we're getting to a point where we can really work together much more effectively. And I think having that institutional space to be able to guide new members and to be able to provide resources to everybody. Here's how you communicate on a platform. Here's how we can share the same message, while still making sure that we are staying in compliance with the Brown Act, I think will be a real benefit to us as a body.
So it's probably not what you expected, but do you love it, and why do you want to stay?
I do love it. I love it because I love Los Angeles. And to me, there is no greater service to this city than what I've been able to do over the last 2.5 years plus. I can see issues in the district, and I have made real progress on tackling some of our thorniest problems. And now I get to have a big discussion around policy issues with the rest of the council and in partnership with the mayor. And it's incredibly exciting. It's what is needed right now here in LA. And I think these are conversations that take a while. It takes a while to learn the system, and it takes a while to understand what are its problems before you can actually start solving them. I feel like I've gotten my hands into resolving them, and I want to keep doing this work.
Just on a little bow on the end of this conversation, there have been some fun things, and I'll just say that you got to celebrate the Hollywood sign,
yes.
Turned 100 years old. What an iconic image for the city, and how fun was it to celebrate the Hollywood sign?
Yeah, so we've had a really, really fun time with some of the incredible, iconic things that Council District 4 is lucky to have in it. We have the Griffith Observatory, we have the Hollywood sign, we have the Hollywood Bowl, we have all of these incredible gifts, which I think are more than just Council District 4 amenities. They are representative of the entire city. Mm-hmm. And truly, you couldn't say that more about the Hollywood sign. It is symbolic of Los Angeles in a way that I think no other tourist attraction is.
True.
So I'm really excited to be representing it. I'm really excited to be celebrating it. And I hope everyone can take a hike soon.
So if people want to have information about what's happening in Council District 4, what's the most direct way for them to do that?
You can visit our website, councildistrict4.lacity.gov, or you can come to our social. We have CD4 Los Angeles on Instagram and on X and on Facebook. So please come visit us on the internet or come visit us in person.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for coming back, and
Thanks.
Hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Thank you so much for having me.
Right,
yes.
thanks. And that's a wrap on this LA Currents.